Less than 60 seconds, guys.
Hey, caller, we're not quite on the air yet. Plus, we have a guest on tonight.
Okay, Mr. Ken, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Talk to you tomorrow.
Okay, bye.
Bye. A Virginian. You don't want to bother with the Virginians,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Can't vote for
I'm
him.
just kidding, of course. Virginians are fine people. I used to live among them. Excellent people.
Alright, stand by as soon as the lag catches up. Kick in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening. Welcome to Star Talk. I'm Ken Eccles, and we're happy to have you with us on the program tonight. We have a special, out of the ordinary hour tonight on Star Talk. This hour, our guest is Dr. Steve Lukin, candidate for North Carolina State Senate. He is running the seat currently occupied by Senator Phil Berger. We'll be speaking with Dr. Lukin starting in just a couple of minutes. I want to take care of some housekeeping first before we do anything else. Quickly, our congratulations to Citizen D, winner of the third stage of our NASCAR contest this summer. Citizen D joins Mr. Draper and Leon as stage winners. We're going to have another opportunity for those of you who didn't win. We got one more chance in our two-race lightning round, and we'll be explaining all of that tomorrow night. But tonight we're talking with Steve Lukin. And Dr. Lukin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thank you.
Dr. Lukin is a Democrat, as I say, running for the state Senate seat currently occupied by Phil Berger. And I'll also add that Mr. Berger, Senator Berger, we have told his folks that he has the same opportunity. If he'd like to come here and spend an hour with us, he is welcome to do that. Why don't you, Dr. Lukin, introduce yourself? Tell folks a little bit about you, because there are probably some people out there who don't know you very well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Ken. So my name is Steve Lukin. I'm a family physician by trade. In fact, my brother and I started Reidsville Family Medicine 31 years ago. And we practiced together, taking care of folks day and evening. And I retired a couple years back. And when I retired, I sent a letter to 2,500 folks telling them that other than having and raising my family, taking care of the folks in Reidsville was the most meaningful commitment of my life. And it was an awesome thing. Folks have often asked how I got into politics. And my answer has kind of turned into just a concise response, and that's basically politics came to me. About 12 years ago, we had the opportunity to expand Medicaid in our state, and I was thrilled about that because between my brother and I, we had literally hundreds of patients, many of them working poor patients who could not afford insurance and weren't provided insurance at their work. And I knew that when they were given Medicaid, that it would definitely improve their lives and improve their health. I also knew that it would improve the health of our rural hospitals. So I was absolutely thrilled. And then, of course, our state, under the leadership of my opponent, made a decision to deny Medicaid expansion. And over those dozen years, I did everything I could, A through Z, and I won't bore you all with the details, but I worked hard in every way I knew to expand Medicaid. And in fact, I was recognized by the North Carolina Medical Society as one of the top several doctors in the state working for that. And so over the dozen years, I came to feel that our state legislature was making some really bad decisions on behalf of our rural communities, and health was just one obvious one. And there are other health issues that we can hopefully talk about in the hour ahead. And education was another. And there are several issues where I just felt like we're on the wrong track, particularly for regular middle-class folks who don't have a seat at the legislative table. And so I decided I would throw my hat in the ring this year and take on Phil Berger for this seat in hopes that I could improve the situation for a lot of folks out there. So that's why I'm running.
Since you mentioned Medicaid, let's talk about that. One of the reasons that the General Assembly gave those 12 years ago and a few subsequent years for not expanding Medicaid in North Carolina was money. They were not confident. They said that the federal government would uphold its end of the bargain, and that the state could have at some point been left holding the bag for quite a large amount of money if the feds didn't come through. Did you see that at the time as a legitimate reason to delay expanding Medicaid?
I did not see that as a legitimate reason to deny the expansion of medical insurance to 600,000 North Carolinians, most of them working poor, people who were out there busting it, but who had no insurance, which statistically increases their likelihood of dying prematurely. And I surely didn't see it as good rationale for all our rural hospitals who were struggling at the time. In fact, our state saw 4 times as many rural hospitals go bankrupt over those dozen years, including Eden's Hospital, compared to the states that had the good sense to expand Medicaid from the start. So the deal from the feds was that they would cover 95% and we would cover 5%. And I felt for that 5% to improve the health of 500,000 North Carolinians, to have a healthier workforce, to have healthier rural hospitals, I thought it was a slam dunk. And really, it's kind of ironic. The same party who on the state level brought this up as a possibility, it's their party on the federal level who at times has mentioned the potential of dialing back Medicaid support on the federal level. So I unless we're willing to shoot ourselves in the foot, I don't think the feds are going to turn that commitment back. It's far too important for the people.
Rural hospitals, independent rural hospitals, have a host of challenges. One obviously involves Medicaid, but that's not the only one. What would you see as things the state ought to do from this point to support rural independent hospitals and make sure that they will still be there when people need them?
So that's a good point. I think we should pause for a moment and state, hey, we expanded Medicaid in December, and that gave an immediate boost in the arm to the rural hospitals. In fact, the Cone system has weighed in and has said it's made all the difference on the Annie Penn side. I've not been privy to information from UNC Rockingham side, but I believe they've also seen a substantial improvement. So I think that was a massive improvement in their situation. But there are other things on both on the state and the federal level. I think that we can lean on insurance companies to do a better job of reimbursing the type of primary and secondary hospital work that's done very well in the community hospitals. I would contend our community hospitals manage things like pneumonia and asthma and fractured hips and other things potentially even better than they do in the large city. But a lot of these sort of run-of-the-mill care I say run of the mill, obviously for the patient experiencing it, it's nothing approaching run of the mill. But what I mean is these particular management situations are not reimbursed very, very highly by the insurance companies. And so the large health systems in the big city are at an advantage because insurance tends to pay them much higher for the subspecialty interventional type work. The hard, difficult personal care things like asthma, stroke, pneumonia, these sorts of things are not paid as well. So I would lean on the systems to readjust the reimbursement in such a way that we would see improvement in that regard. So, yeah.
And let's define leaning on the system. When you lean on an insurance company, and we've all heard this song and dance before, the insurance company says, "Oh, by the way, we don't have to do business in this state if you make it too difficult for us." So where's the point there? How do you fine tune the system to get the insurance companies to behave differently without having them threaten to leave the state?
I would submit that as a whole, insurance companies do quite well in our current system, number one. Number two, they have a very large seat at the legislative table, far larger of a seat than the average patient or the average community interest. And I think there's leverage on the part of the state. I mean, I think you've seen it recently with the state shifting from Blue Cross to Aetna in terms of the state health plan coverage. Nobody was really scared that Blue Cross would uproot their very lucrative position in the state and somehow, exit stage right. They're still a player in the insurance system, and you can bet next year they will probably come back with maybe an offer that might cause the state to look back in their direction once again. So, and it's not only the insurance companies. I think the large health systems too need some pressure from consumer-oriented, patient-oriented legislators who perhaps are not accepting as much money from these large entities in terms of campaign donations. And I know that's a little bit of a controversial statement, but I'm not afraid to make it. I think that when you see the phenomenal amount of cash coming out of some of these systems towards the legislators, I think it cannot help but influence the legislators in their process. And it's one of the reasons why in my own campaign, I have declined to take any donations from any super PACs, where often corporations can be hidden away within those donations. And I've declined to take any donations from anyone who at any time, either a business or person, who may have any current business or any future business before the General Assembly. So I of course, I realize that's a pretty bold proposal, and I know not a lot of legislators would be willing to take that on very quickly, but that would certainly be one way to sort of balance out consumers and patients versus the large entities at the Raleigh level, for sure.
So you would see if I understand you correctly, you're suggesting some sort of state legislation, some law in which the General Assembly sets particular rates for particular situations and enforces them. Can you give us an example of what one of those would be?
So I'm not stating that they take over the payment structure per se, but there are ways that this can happen. So for instance, on the state level, the General Assembly wisely over the last 10 years decided that primary care clinicians need to be paid more for their services. A lot of studies have revealed that primary care clinicians save the system money. And earlier on, when it was a system without any private participation, unlike now. The state and the General Assembly and the physicians groups and all got together and actually gave a bump up in primary care reimbursement in order to hopefully improve physicians and mid-level folks deciding to go into primary care, realizing that the community desperately needs it. And that in turn has carried through with the privatization of Medicaid that is still going on. So I only submit that our General Assembly could approach the large insurance companies and the large hospital systems and basically say, hey, our rural communities are struggling. We've lost a lot of rural hospitals to bankruptcy. Much of the care they provide is traditionally primary and secondary care, not tertiary care. And so traditionally the pay is relatively low. And we would like for you to adjust the remuneration so that rural hospitals are paid more for this standard management of these less high technical interventions, and perhaps carve back a little bit on the high tech in order to make it revenue neutral. And I think you would see community hospitals, of which tend to be more rural in their presence, do better in terms of overall reimbursement and overall financial stability.
Dr. Steve Luking is running for North Carolina State Senate, the seat currently occupied by Rockingham County and Eden's Senator Phil Berger. Our email address is, as it always is, kechols47@gmail.com. And here's a question. I have a question for the doctor, says this emailer. I called my primary provider to make an appointment, and they told me that they could see me in 5 weeks. I'm sick today. If it takes 5 weeks to see my primary care doctor, and I already know it does, 5 months to get an appointment with a specialist, I want to know if he can fix that. Can you fix that?
I personally, at the moment, cannot fix that. But legislatively, I think that there are priorities that can be more prioritized, and I realize that was a mangled sentence, that in turn can tell the large health systems, many of whom employ primary care clinicians in the rural areas now, that, hey, we need more rural clinicians out here in the rural communities. I think if you're in the suburbs of some of these large cities where the very same large hospital systems own these medical practices, I think you will find that the wait time is less than it is out here in our county or in our rural areas. And I'll just give you 2 specific examples, and I'll keep it relatively short. Family doctors in this county who are paid by the large hospital systems are paid partly by what they call quality. And that means how many of your patients have well-controlled diabetes, how many of your patients are compliant with their medication, and that's a reasonable expectation. But right now, unfortunately, the large health systems, not just Cone and Atrium, but just about every large one, as I speak with rural clinicians, their concern is that the large systems compare their quality in the rural areas to the quality of clinicians who are practicing in the suburbs. And so you have folks in the suburbs who are taking care of largely patients who have a higher economic status and who can more afford their medications and who are not struggling as much. and who've had less difficulties with absence of insurance the last dozen years, courtesy of our General Assembly not providing Medicaid to so many working poor folks out here that tend to be in the rural areas. And so right now there's a comparison of clinicians of rural to suburban, and it's frankly an unfair comparison. The clinicians out here in our rural areas are struggling under a sicker, older, poorer population, and the hospital system should make an adjustment accordingly in terms of expectation. Currently, they're not doing that. So I doubt that a legislator has even leaned on the large hospital systems to get their act together in that regard. I promise you, if I go to Raleigh, that will be one of my main priorities, is to look at these sort of systemic issues where rural areas get the short shrift, maybe unintentionally, maybe not, but this is just one example. So I can't fix the caller's problem right now, but I can say that one way to get more capable clinicians to settle to the rural areas is to insist that the large systems be fairer in their expectations of folks who are working under more difficult circumstances to bring good health to the community.
Well, certainly healthcare is an extremely important issue, but it's not the only one. And an emailer says, Ken, I would like to know how Steve Luking feels about a big gambling casino maybe being built in Western Rockingham County next to Camp Carefree. Let's hear his comment on the casino.
I'll be happy to weigh in on that. I think the casino is not a good idea. I realize there are different opinions on both sides of the equation, and so I can only give you my assessment based on my careful look at it, and it falls under several categories. For one, ethically, I think it's a bad deal. A lot of studies have shown the 10-mile radius around any casino sees a sudden surge in problem gambling. There's also an increase in small crime. Sorry, my new earpieces are falling out. There's a surge, an increase in small crime. There is a tendency for these large casinos to hold on to entertainment dollars. I mean, they're very good at taking money from people. So you can bet they're not going to want to spread their economic fruits with local restaurants and all. They will do their darndest to keep their profits within their system. 3/4 of jobs that are associated with casinos are service industry jobs, earning on the average of $16 per hour currently in the casino in Danville. And I will note that in Danville, they made a commitment to pay a minimum of $16 per hour. I don't think there was any such commitment made on the part of Rockingham County as they were looking at things. Our economic advisor, Lee Cochran, has stated that she wants new industries to average $23 an hour. So why on earth would we pull in a casino, which would become the flagship industry for our whole county, the largest employer, 3/4 of the jobs paying a wage that would not allow a person to raise a family? I just think it's a bad deal, both ethically, and it's a bad deal economically. So I frankly am not in favor of it. And I also wish, this gets back to my discussion earlier about motivation. You know, my opponent accepted tens of thousands of dollars from the casino industry in campaign donations before he put his thumb on the scale and really tried to push this thing through. And I feel it was, even on the county level, I'm not in favor. I think a lot of it was done behind the scenes and without transparency and without input from the community. But I don't think it's the tens of thousands of dollars, Ken, or to the caller or to the emailer. I think it's a potential of hundreds of thousands of dollars of payola that would come from the casino industry to the General Assembly. The video gaming industry from 2018 to 2021 sent $800,000 to Raleigh, of which the vast majority went to my opponent's party. And I think they are looking at the casino across the state as the same sort of cash cow flowing to their campaign coffers. I only wish that we could make decisions based on actual value to the community rather than value to campaign donations.
Senator Berger has called it a dead issue, and certainly it was a dead issue this year. Do you think it's a dead issue next year or the year after?
So I would like to correct that just a hair, Ken. This summer in the Greensboro-Dayton Daily News, he called it he said, in my opinion, his exact words were, "This is a dormant, if not dead issue." On my website, or I'm sorry, on my Facebook site, you can see a piece that got 13,000 hits where I used a dead copperhead snake to illustrate to Senator Berger the difference between dormant and dead. And my point, and I'll make it succinct, was if you step on a copperhead snake that's dormant, sunning itself on the edge of the woods late in the fall, you very quickly are going to see the difference between dead and dormant. And I think that was a very cleverly, lawyerly response that he gave. And he realized that the word dormant and or dead included both potentials. And so my challenge to him was to declare whether this snake is truly dead or it's dormant. And of course, I didn't get a response either. I'd love for him to come on the show and give a response. But he said dormant or dead, which to me, Ken, means January, whatever, here we go again. So I do not trust the dormant or dead delineation for the casino. I think that provides a wide open door for post-election trouble again.
And let me mention again very quickly, we have made equal time available to Senator Phil Berger if he wishes to come on the show, and we hope he will. Here's an emailer who says, yesterday I went to vote and I had to show a photo ID, which I think is a very, very good idea in North Carolina. And yet the Democratic Party has been fighting tooth and nail all this time to stop photo ID in North Carolina. Exactly what are they afraid of, and what is Mr. Luking's position on that?
That's a reasonable question. So I certainly want the vote to be free and fair. I certainly want our elections to be free and fair, both on the state level and on the federal level. And I may add, I think that all elections on the state and federal level up till now have been largely free and fair. The concern about the photo ID was that it might lead to the disenfranchisement of some folks in terms of them not having access to photo ID. It was the concern on the Democrat side was that this was a bit of a ploy utilized to perhaps select out certain folks who might be able to vote, and who are completely legal to vote, except for the fact that they don't have a legitimate ID. And this whole process of pushing the voter ID was supposedly because of all this large amount of fraud that was going on. But if I recall, in the last couple of elections, the amount of fraud involving folks actually misidentifying themselves intentionally was an extremely small number. And the concern on my part as a not a Democrat, but just a citizen, was that some folks may be unfairly left out. And I will give Ken a perfect example, and it will take only 30 seconds. Last week, I gave a talk at a local rest home. And yes, I did present my case and what I'm hoping to do for the rural communities, but we also talked about the importance of voting. And it was a great interaction with 30 some individuals, and clearly a lot of them weren't voting in my direction, and that's okay. But it was heartbreaking to listen to the number of people in that room who were dealing with issues of not having a photo ID and having tremendous difficulty with transportation, requiring an extra trip out to the Board of Elections in order to get a photo. There was one gentleman who just in the last couple months had been brought up from Guilford County, and he clearly wasn't thrilled by it, but the only place he could get a rest home spot was up here, and he dearly wanted to vote. And when he heard it would take multiple trips, and this man was disabled with his current situation, when he heard it would take multiple trips to try to get a ID and make it all happen, he was clearly disappointed that he could not use his current situation. So, I would submit that yes, we want a free and fair election, and you want to only honor those who truly are allowed to vote. Then again, let's make a plea for both parties to completely honor the results of all elections. That would be a nice thing also. But specifically, that was the concerns about photo ID.
The photo ID law that's on the books now, of course, is not the one we started with a few years ago. It's been through changes and challenges along the way. As the law is written right now, what would you change about it if you had the opportunity?
Well, so for instance, let's just look at one from last week. And once again, I'm not an expert. I just saw the writing on the wall. I know how many people are compromised in terms of ability to have solid transportation. And I knew that folks were going to be left out. And just last week, some of the residents in the rest home had been there for a while. They were under the age of 65, and they had allowed their driver's license to expire. And they were concerned that that the state law states if your driver's license has expired and you're over age 65, that will be honored at the Board of Elections. But if you're under the age of 65, then you have to attest other factors involving your difficulty getting ID. So to me, it's just another barrier. So perhaps stating that under the age of 65, if you've lost your license permanently, you should, or the right to drive permanently, you should still have the ability for that driver's license to be a photo ID that you can present legally at the Board of Elections.
There's a constitutional amendment to the state constitution on the ballot this year, and I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not going to try to quote it, but I think we all understand. It constitutionalizes the fact that only legal citizens can vote in elections in North Carolina. Is that a necessary amendment? What do you think of it?
So if once again, I don't mean to disagree with you, but I studied that quite a bit this summer, knowing that it would come up. However, I did not study enough to memorize it. And I am not a constitutional lawyer by no means, but when you read the original clause as currently in the Constitution, to me, it clearly states that you have to be a citizen of our state in order to vote. And the concern on my side of the aisle is it's just basically a restating of what is already in there. And frankly, Phil Berger's party and probably the Democrat Party in the past. I don't know. I haven't looked at these things for the last 40 years, but this seemed to be a cause that was inserted in order to encourage the party faithful to get out and to vote clearly for what should be wanted by all. But I think the current Democratic contention is that it's already stated. It just stated in different words. So in that sense, yes, I'm for it, but I'm not for it if we're just going to simply restate things that are already clear according to constitutional interpretation, but just restate it in order to try to get out your own party. That's trickery we really don't need in order to try to encourage folks to vote. Let's let all folks who can legally vote before we start using the same words to restate the constitutional clauses.
Emailer says, since the Republicans took control in Raleigh, I think in 2010, we have seen a series of reductions in the North Carolina income tax rate and increases in the personal exemptions for North Carolina income tax. And our income tax rate in this state is way lower than it was when the Democrats were in charge. What would Mr. Luking do about that? Would he want to raise those taxes again?
So that's an excellent question. I'll be more than happy to answer that also. Yes, that is true that income tax rates have fell, although I would note it's more the higher income folks who've seen the greatest reduction, people making my kind of wage as a family doctor, as opposed to a lot of folks at the middle class level. And so our income taxes become more regressive, where whether you realize or not, middle class and lower class folks are paying a higher amount. But Ken and to the emailer, my huge concern is the fact that corporate taxes have been cut and slashed very considerably under the direction and joy of my opponent, Phil Berger. He often boasts that cutting corporate taxes to zero, which will be where we'll be at in a couple of years, will be the lowest in the nation and will be a good cause for us to grow economically. What he doesn't point out is that Virginia this past year took over as #1 over North Carolina as far as CNBC's most attractive state for business, and their corporate tax is still 6%. Now, I'm hearing a lot of Republican questions tonight, and I'm more than happy to answer them. As you're noticing, I'm more than willing to answer. But there's a huge, huge issue we haven't touched on much, and that is by slashing both income tax rates, but particularly corporate tax rates. The way we have paid that in our state is by allowing our public education funding to go to the absolute bottom of the barrel. We were 31st in the nation 20 some years ago. We are now 48th in the nation as far as funding. The difference for Rockingham County schools alone means that if you look at the current number of students and inflation adjusted, we are dealing with $20 million less money to deal with. And we have seen teacher pay slip. We've seen class sizes enlarge. We've seen our schools lose an incredible number of teachers having to go to the large cities for the bigger differentials or up into Virginia where they can earn more pay. So basically, this tax slashing, particularly of the corporate tax, has been paid for by our next generation of school kids, which I think are facing the real possibility of a suboptimum education going forward. And I think that's ethically and morally dead wrong. And I also think it's not smart from a skilled workforce standpoint. I think currently our schools are holding our own and our teachers are fighting and struggling and they're doing their best, but not because of state support, but in spite of it. And that can only last so long. Sooner or later, we're going to pay a dear price as we watch our skilled workforce deteriorate because of the slashing of corporate taxes.
This also brings us to opportunity scholarships. And I assume most people know what we're talking about here. That is public support for generally low-income families to send their kids to private school. Would you, if you had the opportunity, end that, or would you adjust it or change it in some way? What would you do?
So I would definitely adjust it. This year, you're probably aware that the major expenditure that our General Assembly voted on was a incredible expansion of the Opportunity Scholarships. They committed $500 million, $500 million, the next 2 years to drastically expand the voucher system. Most of that, Ken, would go to families earning $116,000 per year or more. Most of that $500 million of taxpayer-funded vouchers will go to wealthy families. And I think that is tremendously wrong. Absolutely, there are some rural communities where poor kids and middle-class kids might have better access to employment, or rather educational opportunities through a local private school, particularly if they have a certain interest. But to expand the vouchers this year to the wealthy, where family doctors earning my wage can ask an industrial line worker or a nurse or a teacher to fork out part of their paycheck so that my kids can go to the fancy private schools in the big city, I think that's dead wrong. Let's move our public schools back up to good, solid funding. In turn, we'll see our public schools recover, and we'll have less need to expand these private vouchers.
Here's an emailer that just popped up since we've been talking about that. Here's what the emailer says. I've never been in favor, in principle, of tax money being paid to private schools, but it is undeniably true that there are cases where a parent lives in a neighborhood where they are not happy with the public school, where there is chaos and disruption in the public school, and they would rather send their child to a private school. And in this case, the state might help them do it. What do you say to a parent in that situation?
So we kind of covered that a bit in the last question, but I do agree that there are certain circumstances for lower income folks, particularly in areas where public education has not kept up to speed, which sadly, to me, falls at the feet of the General Assembly because of their literal defunding of public education over the last 20 years. Do you know, Ken, in the last 20 years, only one state in the nation has seen a drop in public education funding as adjusted for inflation per pupil. Only one state in the nation. That's North Carolina. So what do we expect? We have dropped public education funding drastically. We're seeing, particularly in the rural areas, we're seeing public schools hurting because of this. Families understand, we look at public schools and they're concerned about what they're seeing and they start looking elsewhere. I get that. But for goodness sakes, our state has a constitutional responsibility to provide a sound public education to all students. My opponent, Phil Berger, when he was asked about expanding the voucher system this year to the wealthy, to people making my income or even higher, asking regular taxpayers to fund our kids going to the fancy private schools, which, by the way, my kids went to Rockingham Public Schools from kindergarten through 12th grade, and they got a darn good education. But my concern is a half a generation from now, that may not be the case if we continue on the same trajectory. In fact, I would say that it's not the case. But my opponent, his exact quote, when they asked him about the expansion of private vouchers to the wealthy, his response was, well, we have a responsibility to educate all kids, rich and poor. And that was a gross misstatement, in my view, of the constitutional obligation. The constitutional obligation is all children will be provided a sound public education. There's nothing in the Constitution about the need for Senator Berger to provide lots of money to wealthy folks to send their kids to private school. And I should note, there is one family that owns a slew of private schools across the state. And that family alone has donated $1 million to the campaigns of Senator Berger and other Republican legislators over the past several years. And certainly this is one of their goals. Once again, it would be awfully nice if somehow the funding of campaigns of General Assembly members could become more fair in terms of not allowing large groups to extend lots of money and persuade legislators to make bad decisions. You want to know a great irony? There was a young junior senator 20 some years ago who advocated pretty much the same thing. His name was Phil Berger. If he ever comes on the show, I'd love for you to ask him the question of comparing and contrasting his idea 20 some years ago versus his position now, accepting incredible amounts of cash from these special interests.
Here's an email that takes us in an entirely different direction. Ken, I want you to ask him about my favorite topic, as you've heard me say many times, I think North Carolina is missing out on a big revenue opportunity that other states take advantage of. And that, of course, is toll roads and toll bridges. I know we got a couple somewhere in North Carolina, but not very many. Why doesn't the state do what so many other states do and build a nice road and charge people money to drive on it?
It's an interesting question. And I must say that I have not dove into it enough and read on both sides of the issue enough to give a succinct answer. And perhaps I might point out that as a legislator, I know going into it, there will be issues that I am not up to speed on. And I will get up to speed on them, and I will learn all that I can, and I will go to sources that don't involve people paying me to listen to them. But that's an interesting question. I don't know. I honestly don't have an opinion on that. So they're the emailer. That person has more of a view than I do. It would be potentially something to look at, but I honestly don't have enough opinion on toll roads. I'm not a huge fan of them, frankly, when I go to other states and I'm having to chunk out money every few miles or get my license plate flashed. No, and our state has a history of excellent roads, and I don't. My first inclination is like, that doesn't seem quite so right. But I'd have to dive into it more before I would give my professional opinion.
The General Assembly has exempted itself from parts of the Freedom of Information Act, something that I don't believe, and I may be wrong, but I don't know that any legislative body in any other state has done that, at least not to the extent that it was done in North Carolina. What's your view on that?
I think any step taken to reduce transparency in this day and age is a huge mistake. Of note, that step was taken this past summer, right after a lot of this debacle that went on around the casino. And I'm not saying put two and two together, but it is awfully interesting that this came up soon after the major kerfuffle that occurred both locally and the Raleigh level. And I don't want to use the word kerfuffle to minimize it. I think it was rammed down the throats of our citizens in a wrong way. I think it was too much of a craven decision looking at money donations from the industry going forward. And I don't think it was a decision made for the good of our community. But that law came in soon after that, and coincidentally reduced the ability of news organizations to see really what was at the roots of the casino deal and who offered what to whom and when and where. And suddenly all that went dark. So My response would be, Ken, anything that diminishes transparency, particularly in a day and age where authorities, be they medical, governmental, what have you, religious, are taking such a hit. I think the less us authorities can be secretive, the better. So I'm not in favor of it.
Well, let's revisit insurance here, a different segment of the insurance industry than what we talked about before, and that is homeowners insurance. And lots of people got worked up earlier this year, and are still worked up, actually, over proposals by the insurance industry to increase homeowners insurance rates. Now, the biggest increases would be on the coast, but there would be significant increases everywhere. Now, we have a state insurance commissioner who deals with this kind of thing. I wonder, do you think the General Assembly ought to have some role to play in that? And do you think that homeowners insurance rates might be excessive for some people?
Well, I think they definitely are excessive. I would submit that the current insurance commissioner, once again, getting back to the transparency issue, abandoned the approach of having open forums for the insurance companies to present their case and for citizens groups to present an alternative case. They don't have to do that. And it's my understanding that he has not always been forthcoming in that approach in recent years. And that's incredibly unfortunate. I happen to know Natasha Marcus, who is a Democratic candidate. She is shooting for more transparency in the issue, and she feels that will give insurance companies a little less of a leg up in terms of twisting the arms of both the commissioner and the system. So, yes, it's definitely a concern. I will also point out this last year, the General Assembly decided to abandon its approach that it's been done in a bipartisan way for 20 some years, where every 6 years they look at builders' codes and generally tighten them up some to improve the stability of homes in storms. And this last year, the General Assembly decided to give the builders a free pass and stick with the code changes that were made a half a dozen years ago. And some of these impact on the ability of homes to handle wind and floods, and also the location of homes and structures in floodplains and even on slopes of land as pertains to the mountains. So the General Assembly bears some responsibility in needing to go back to the general approach of listening to the latest science on what's the best way to construct safe homes that will endure through storms.
We've used up the hour, except for enough for you to take a minute or so to add anything you'd like to add to what we've talked about.
Well, thanks, Ken, and thanks to all your listeners out there. I've always enjoyed watching your show, although I'm not a big TV watcher, but and particularly back when you and Mark were joking it together. You and I didn't joke it up too much tonight, but that's okay. That we covered a lot of serious things. It's been my honor this year to run for office. You know, I think the average person needs more representation in Raleigh. That's my big contention. I watched us not expand Medicaid for a dozen years. I watched people pay a terrible price for that. Statistically, thousands across the state died prematurely over those dozen years. We lost a lot of hospitals to bankruptcy. Now we are quickly moving towards a second-rate education system unless we get our act together and prioritize education funding fast. I think we need to challenge corporations to get back to pay their fair share taxes, which, by the way, will help lower property taxes too. We didn't get into that too much, but it's been my honor listening to folks. I've knocked on thousands of doors this year. I've not been afraid to come to any TV shows or any interviews or any forums. I'm happy to answer any question. I'm happy to listen to all ideas on the issues. I think that's what we need going forward. And I'm happy to be running for Senate this year.
Dr. Steve Luking is a candidate for the seat in the North Carolina Senate, currently held by Senator Phil Berger. And Dr. Luking, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
We're on the air Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays with Star Talk. I hope you'll join us next time. Thanks for watching. I'm Ken Echols.